Hi everyone, it's Niamh here and welcome to my art journaling channel. Today we're going to be looking at some mixed media collage and using more than one type of ephemera. So I'm starting in my Dina Wakley media journal and I'm working on the canvas substrate, and I'm just covering the background with some collage medium, some gesso mixed together. I've torn up some bits of encyclopedia text. I'm just gluing those down in a random fashion, and then I found this old crossword in a magazine, gluing that down too, just to give that sort of black and white contrast. I'm quite impressed looking back at this to see that I managed to line up completely coincidentally the crossword with the black and white check on the other page. So basically what I'm just doing is building up some texture. I'm not really caring what I'm putting down or where I'm putting it down, because some of it will peek through, some of it won't. And I really don't know at this stage what I'm going to put on this page. I just know I want to have little bits peeking through. So what I've done is put another light coat of gesso over the top just to blend everything in together. And now I'm using the Dina Wakley heavy bodied acrylics in Ocean, Marine, Peacock I think, and Night, which is that dark blue going down. Now I'm working wet on wet with this, and that's why the colours are blending in really well together. And I've just put a stencil over the top. I think it's by Joggle. I'm not sure with that one. I know it's called Tornado. Over the top, using a wet wipe to remove some of the paint. Now you can see the paint removed in the areas where there was a glossy magazine. It came off quite well, but I wasn't particularly happy with how it went. So I just went over again with a little bit of gesso, just again to sort of blend it all in together and try the pattern again. This time what I'm going to do is, instead of removing paint, I'm going to add paint to it. So I'm adding some of the Night to get a bit more of a contrast, a bit deeper effect. And you can see that happening there. You can still see some of the text coming through, but now it's sort of building up those layers. And I'm just, while I've got the stencil out in my Use It Up journal, just popping some of the leftover paint and stencils into that. So I knew I wanted to have a figure of some sort in this page, and I'm cutting out one from a fashion magazine which is in black and white. This is one of the problems with doing collage. You come across an image you really like and you put it aside and then you forget about it. When I actually cut this out and turned it over, I realised I'd actually cut it out because I really liked the figure on the other side. But this is the one I ended up with. So what I'm doing now is going in with a football pen and just highlighting the features and drawing them in. Now the reason I'm doing this is because I know I'm going to paint over the top of it, and I want to have those lines that I can sketch back in again. It's really important that you leave the football to dry. It doesn't take very long. You saw me hit it with a heat gun, but it will smear if you don't. Now I've put a light layer of gesso over the top, again to sort of blend it back into the background. The reason I'm doing this is because I want to make this image my own. I don't want it to be just something taken out of a magazine. I want to sort of try and incorporate it into the page and sort of show the hand of the artist, so to speak. So I'm using Distress Oxides and a stencil to put some patterns onto the lady's clothes, and again I'm using a wet wipes to take it off, and I really like that sort of bubbly effect that I ended up with. Now I'm going in with this Stabilo oil pencil and using those guidelines that I drew in beforehand to redraw some of the lines and to get some shading back in again. It sort of seems a bit counterintuitive, I suppose, and there is nothing wrong with just gluing the lady down as is. This is just a technique I quite like. So I've coloured her face using distress crayons, which gave sort of a really soft effect. And I'm using alcohol markers on the hair, again, just to add in a little bit of detail. Now you can use any markers. I'm using the alcohol markers because I have them sitting in front of me and they work quite well on a glossy magazine. And you can see by putting in the highlights with a white paint pen, just by putting the highlights in the eye, it just completely changes that image. So I used the colour palette that I had because it blended in with the background. I sort of wanted a kind of monochromatic look to happen. While I was happy with the pattern in the background, I thought it lacked something. So I'm going back in again with some stencils. Those are Tim Holtz stencils and some black paint, black ink. Just to add some pattern back over her clothing again. And I've just darkened behind where I know I'm going to glue down the image. So I'm using Collage medium to glue the image down. This Collage medium is really, really good for thin paper, like magazine paper. Particularly if you're sticking on something that's not paper, like the canvas. You will find it will curl slightly. The other thing that you need to be aware of with the canvas is it does take a long time to dry, because obviously you're making a fabric wet with the amount of paint that you're adding onto it. So just be aware that it will take a while to dry, and also be aware that it will shrink. You can see already with the work that I've done that the canvas itself is shrunk, and you can see some of the pages behind. I really like that effect, and I like the bits and pieces hanging off it. Some people get a little bit angsty about that, so just be aware that if you have done it, it will shrink down. Now these leaves are from Kaisercraft, from an ephemera pack. I have no idea where I found them, but as I was going through, I knew this needed something and I wasn't sure what it needed, and they fell out of the drawer that was sitting next to me, and I thought, oh, she could be she looks like she's looking at something, so she could be peering through the foliage to see something. So I then had to go and find a whole heap of other leaves. I knew there was more than one in the packet, but I was really struggling to find them. So you'll find me any spare leaf I had, or any bit that I cut off, I re-glued on just to thicken up the foliage somewhat. So now I'm going back in with the food pen just to darken again the features, give her some eyelashes, and make it a little bit more interesting. So I've left this to dry for a little bit. I had a load of stickers out, but they were too small. I looked at cutting in letters out of a magazine, but they were just not quite right. So I ended up choosing the Tim Holtz foam alphabet, and this one's I think it's distressed typewriter, and I'm going to stamp with that. Now the great thing about the foam stamps, well, with any stamps, but particularly with the foam stamps, is they work really well with acrylic paint, which means you can actually get a fairly solid, opaque, white stamped image. Now, for those people who have been in stamping for a while, a white ink pad is quite difficult to find, and it's quite difficult to stay white when it's stamped over other media, particularly things like inks and so on. It tends to pick up the colours from the background. So if you can stamp with paint, it does help. Now even then you can see the colours from behind are coming through, but it's much more opaque than it would usually be, and you can always go back in and repaint over the top. When you've got the guidelines down there, you can always go back with a thin paintbrush and paint over the top, or use a paint pen to go over the top. So I think the quote that I've chosen is "choose to see the good." I'm not sure if that's a whole quote. Choose to see the good things, perhaps. And again, I don't mind that I'm stamping over my image. The fact that her face is up the top and the busyness with the leaves is up the top, the rest of it's quite monochromatic. It kind of all blends in. Having the quote over the image blends it all together. The other thing is, when you're stamping with acrylic blocks and doing a quote next to a gutter, put it on the opposite edge that you normally would. So you saw I moved it from the right to the left, or whatever it is reversed on screen. I'm terrible with my left and right. So that the shortest edge is next to the gutter. You don't have anything hanging over, and that will help you get a really, really good impression. I'm also using a brayer to roll on the paint just to get an even coating. You can paint it on with a paintbrush, that's fine. You can stamp into it. The only thing I would say is, if you do stamp into it, make sure you have got a thin coat of paint on whatever surface you're stamping into. If you've got too much paint, you're going to get really squishy letters and paint squishing out everywhere. I'm sure that's a technical term. So having a brayer just to even out that paint is a really handy thing to do. The other thing is have your quote written out somewhere. I don't think I had for this one. I was hoping I could actually spell everything that I had. It wasn't things, it was stuff. But sometimes it's very, very easy to spell something incorrectly. So if you've got the quote written out somewhere, you can sort of check off the letters as you go to make sure you've got them in the right order. The other thing is just the way you place them on your block. You need to be good at reading backwards. And luckily, being a teacher, reading upside down and backwards is something I'm fairly skilled at as I'm walking around the classroom, but for some people they really struggle to do that. So I would suggest, if you're worried about it, have a spare piece of paper next to you or your use it up journal, stamp it out there, make sure you've got the right letters, make sure the placement's okay for you, and then stamp it onto your journal. So now all I'm doing is drying off the text and then going in with the Stabilo Oil pencil to put the highlights. Now, when I was doing this, I was really struggling with where to place the shadows. I was putting them in the sort of random places and I wasn't really happy with it. To be honest, you wouldn't really know when you look at it, and by putting the darks in, it sort of pulls it out from the background. Since sort of doing this and playing with words and writing a little bit more, particularly trying to do some hand lettering, what I've found is if I imagine that the light is coming from the top right hand corner, all the dark shadows are going to be on the bottom left of the letters. And if you sort of set up a rule like that in your head, you're going to be consistent with what you're doing. So for a lot of this, it looks like I've got the light coming from the bottom left, so everything's going on the top right. So I've just reversed it. So if you follow the same rule, it doesn't matter where you've got the shadows coming from, but it's good to sort of be consistent as you go along. So that's pretty much the end of the journal page. It was a fairly simple one, and again, while I've got the collage in the background, you can't really see it until you start doing the close-up and seeing the textures in the background. Sometimes what you do in the background peeks out, sometimes it doesn't, but that's the fun of collage. I hope you really enjoyed watching this video. You have a go at using some media in the background. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you on the channel next time.